I thought we'd continue with some more of the vagaries regarding the aspect that it is very difficult, tricky to govern and to be governed in and by a foreign tongue, if you recall where we were. And even take this into such all-time favorite areas as regarding you and life, regarding you and not you, and regarding the several inner circuits that some people are reputed to have, and so damn on, etc. Assuming you're up to speed from the last time we met, the thing is, take it symbolically to start with, that it is very tricky, downright difficult for one group or a ruler to rule, to govern a group that does not share the same language. It has always been a historical difficulty, to say the least. And then, of course, some of you held me down and made me admit last time that this might have some kind of internal, personal, symbolic, of course, some of you said metaphorical, and then the rest of you beat up that crowd and pointed out, no, it'd be symbolic, not metaphorical. Come in. But it might have some internal pertinence. That is, there are different languages going on, not just on this planet. The Tower of Babel was not simply something that some of those people made up while sitting out in the desert and hallucinating. And of course, it doesn't mean that they actually built it. Who knows? But there is a specific dynamics that goes on that is not negative, having to do with the various languages. Notwithstanding the fact that for years and years and years, and this is a reasonable secondary view of the claims that life would be more civilized, there'd be less aggression, we would all be in better shape if the world indeed had one language. Rather than singling in on various religions, conflicting races, nationalistic tendencies and all that, it has been pointed out by people, and there is some validity. Obviously, life has not taken it to heart, since it was its own idea, it can do anything it wants to, but it has not taken it to heart enough. But it's been pointed out that if everyone spoke the same language, just as a good start, it would be harder, they say, to attack. That if the French spoke German instead of French, and of course God knows they should be speaking some decent language, but at any rate, that it would have been harder for them to have those kind of conflicts. But what I was trying to get you to consider, there is something afoot, and that is just the crudest symbolic aspect of it, of there being different languages on this planet. Because you've got to get past that. You've got to see, I point out 3 great areas, in my humble opinion. The dialogue between life and you, by whatever means you might know it if you were an ordinary person, of you believing you're talking to yourself, of you believing that you are the proud owner and operator of your own brain. You're getting this information somewhere. You didn't get it out of a book. And in fact, if you got it out of a book, you didn't get it from the author that wrote the book. And of course, if you got it from the author that wrote the book, he didn't get it from a book. You know how that goes. And so damn on. It is a dialogue going on between you and life. And it is at various junctures, different languages. And there is the area between you and not you. That is, between you and what appears to be other people. And not just people who actually speak a different literal tongue, between you and people who speak the same language as you, between you and your own family, and then between what seems to be the inner workings of one's own nervous system. These eccentricities beyond the immediate and obvious inefficiency of this arrangement throughout life from top to bottom, beyond this, you must recognize life's humor and the super efficiency. It is in the secondary world that the inspecificity of words and directions have, in part, their own strength. The blood, the breath, and a certain kind of glue of the secondary world is directly based, that secondary world is directly based upon the ambiguities, the uncertainties of the words, ideas, and apparent directions, that is, the energies, but it appears to be directions, flowing from life to man, from man to man, and within yourself, like the voice of conscience, or trying to operate by reason, trying to do that which is best for you. You're always dealing, to some degree, with a loss in the translation, as always, based upon the general laws of physics, if nothing else. But you're losing something. Therefore, to some degree, you and life are always speaking a different tongue. You and everyone else, your best friend, your fraternal brother, your blood brother, your twin sister, your mother, are speaking slightly different tongues. Within yourself is always a loss in the translation. Even if you saying, well, I'll do so-and-so. I know it sounds weird, I guess, to start with, but you're losing something. There's a different tongue. If you say there's not, or if you refuse to see it, then you refuse to see anything, because it goes on continually. Someone's saying, I should cut down on my eating. Why in the world do you have to say that? Well, assuming there's some validity. Assuming you're overeating and it's making you lethargic, making you overweight. I drink too much. It's making me dizzier, and I stumble about more than I do sober even. Why do you have to say that to yourself? The reason you have to say to yourself that you should do anything is that the original, you forgot the original comment that was made. The original comment you didn't completely get, even when it seemed to be you. That's why I'm giving you three choices: you and life, you and everyone else, and then you and yourself. So it's all the same thing, of course. But so that it appears to be things that you're doing in the privacy of your own closet, brain, that you say, well, I should do so-and-so. I should go back to school. I should exercise more. Anything that you say I should, what you're saying is, without knowing it, is the original time I thought this. The original time that the message came through. I mean, it seemed to make sense, but I don't know, something happened. And so you had to tell yourself again, yes, I should cut down on caffeine. Yes, I should cut down on my alcohol consumption. Do you understand? Assuming it's irrelevant to subversive purposes, for revolutionist purposes, but assuming at the ordinary secondary level that it does have some pertinence, that there is some energy flowing through you into such a way that it continues for a long period, if not your whole life, that I should eat less, I should drink less, I should be improving myself. It is a form, unrecognized, of admitting that the first time I thought that, I didn't get it completely. Maybe I misunderstood. Now, if we tried to stop and analyze this very specifically, we could say that's ridiculous, because how in the world? What kind of insanity is it to say that someone would talk to themselves and then go, what? What'd you say? Yeah, that sounds ridiculous. Maybe you'd go along metaphorically, all right, if that's the best you can do, by saying that people misunderstand each other at times, that perhaps even your mother can say, don't do that. And later you say, when she says, why'd you do it? You said, I thought you said don't eat a rat. Now, maybe I can go along with that. But that's being silly to say that I would think something to myself and then later go, wait a minute, I didn't understand you. That's silly, right? Yes, it is. Except for this. Well, I agreed. What the hell you want? But let me ask you this. Then how do you explain? We're back to assuming. I'm assuming for your benefit, seeing as we have mostly humans here, I'll assume for your benefit that you had a thought that had some ordinary validity, like, I should do better in life. Let's assume that had some validity. If you understood that, I mean, it's a short, I should do better. 4 words. I should do better. If it's that clear, and it is silly to say, well, how could somebody misunderstand themselves? Then how do you explain the fact that you've had to think that more than once? Why are you having to think it again? Well, you don't fool me. You do understand it, you just don't like to hear it. See, if it's ordinary people, they can say, well, I don't know, we're too weak, or I had to keep reminding myself, or we've always got to be refighting the battle and trying to do better. I like mine better, for today at least. just one day out of the year, but consider it. That something got lost in the translation. 4 words, I should do better. Why do you have to say it again? Assuming we're still going with my third possibility, that you actually communicate with you, that you actually try to tell yourself something. If we stop and say, well, it's clear enough I should do better, or I should quit smoking. That's straightforward, unambiguous. There's no doubt I should. All right, how long have you been smoking? 57 years. Is this the first time you ever thought that? My goodness, no. Well, is there any doubt what that means when you say I should quit smoking? Well, no, there's no doubt what I mean. Are you nuts? And if I say, well, I can say, well, I don't know, I'm too weak, or my body is too acclimated to the need for nicotine. Those are childish explanations. Anybody could come up with that. How about you are being governed by a foreign tongue? You are a poor Roman in the hands of a Visigoth. You're a Visigoth later in the hands of a Castilian, which we don't get into. You're being ruled, being governed by a foreign tongue. But remember, we start out pointing out that there is a certain kind of exhilarating eccentricity about being governed or governing by under a foreign tongue. Because that gives you the way to look at it internally, whether it's you talking to you or vice versa. This you got to understand. It would be hard, you understand, on the Romans to be governed by the Visigoths, assuming that nobody understood what the Visigoths were talking about. That is, the Romans at least. So the Romans would have a hard time. There you are, conquered. You gave it up. All right, you win. And then you got to go ahead about your life. You got to adapt, but you cannot speak their language. You're probably going to be in for additional heartache besides having Rome sacked. There's probably going to be more problems that you're trying to get along. And the Visigoths come down the street and they look at you and they mumble something or they holler something in a tongue you don't know, and you go, and suddenly somebody kicks you. It hits you, and it's obvious they're trying to say something you don't know what. You take off your clothes, you give them your money, and they hit you again. All right, it's difficult to be governed. But also notice, it is difficult to govern. There they are, they've won the war. The Romans went, we give. All right, so we can all relax. And so they have got to get things back to some degree of operation there in the city. The Visigoths, unless they're going to murder everybody, the conqueror, the ruler, the triumphant one, has got to live with the defeated. Of course, if they actually understood the four-dimensional world, one reason they got to live with them is that the DNA of the defeated will, at some future date, be kicking your ass. But at any rate, even at that time, you've got to get along with the defeated, unless you're just going to kill them all, which is inefficient. And so, understand the difficulty. Is the Romans all give, they turn in their spears, they turn everything they got, and so then the Visigoths try and say, all right, well, everybody go home, go back to your business, and don't be out on the street if you see a column of us coming through. You understand? And maybe one or two Romans picked up a little bit, and they go, well, yeah. And so, but then they start to have maneuvers, or whatever it was that they instructed the Romans to do, and the Romans don't do it. And they have to keep fighting them. You understand? It would be difficult from both sides, not just from one side. Now back to internally, that you can believe you're talking to yourself. But there is a unrecognized off-center arrangement wherein this appears to be very inefficient. And when you get beyond that, it is a form, not in the three-dimensional world, this will not fly, but it is a form of super efficiency. It literally, amongst other things, but it literally is a kind of glue. The inefficiency at ordinary levels in the secondary world, which is the only place it exists, of language. How about throughout the world? Probably one of the most common axioms, religiously and otherwise, is the good old one of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's a form of that everywhere. Now, at first, from one quite reasonable view, that seems to be a very tight idea, form of directions. The Visigoths could be laying it on the Romans. Confucius could be laying it on the little Confucians, the little hulksters. Jesus can be laying it on anybody hanging around. Life seems to direct that. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It seems to be very tight, and yet it is quite loose. It is quite inspecific. There's an old kind of a joke, surely, that some of you should have already, I say a joke, it's just something that when you were a smart-ass young kid, about 7 or 8, at least you guys, women up until the 20th century were too decent. But some of you smart-ass guys hanging around the temple or a church somewhere, I bet you heard somebody wave their finger in Sunday school or say, listen, it's very important, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I bet some of you laughed and you looked at each other and said, what happens if you're a masochist? Or what happens if you like to be tied up, dressed like a Girl Scout, and have somebody beat you, with half-done pasta? And then you all had to laugh like, boy, that shows the church up for, they know what they're doing. That's more than some kind of childish joke. The directions that would appear to have the widest pertinence to the secondary world, the kinds of directives, the kinds of religious, philosophical ideas, forget now about how much they're exercised, but there appears to be the kind of intellectual link pins that hold civilization together. God is love. Let me make it as short as I can. Jesus saves. Now we're down to 2 words. But for those that don't believe Jesus saves, or at least have some fear because of the S&L crisis about how reliable it is that he saves anyway. But that is, do unto others. Love thy neighbor as thyself. You can say that. You can say, well, how about people that commit suicide? How about people that have suicidal tendencies? Every idea, politically, religious, philosophically, that apparently has been some major influence on some sector of humanity, at first can appear to be quite direct, unambiguous, right to the point, but they're not. They are not. Notice the world does not live by such things, although this is still open to interpretation, as some of you up to date with mathematics know. Notice the world has not ever been assumed that it was being driven or should be driven by such ideas as 2 and 2 is 4, because at most rudimentary secondary views, that is too direct. It's got to be more on the line of something that can be looser than it appears. That it can be what amounts to a loose ship with a tight cargo, or vice versa. Everything that would appear to be of supreme significance in the affairs of man, the secondary affairs of man, not the primary, not just basic sex and keeping the organism and race alive, but everything else has the ability to appear to be very direct, and is taken as being very direct. Whether you live by it, whether it's part of your religion or your culture, is beside the point. They appear to be very direct. The 10 Commandments, thou shalt, and yet they are loose. They are ambiguous. They are uncertain. That is the reason that they seem to have a certain kind of vivaciousness, a certain kind of power, in fact, a certain kind of charm. But notice, even though I said a few minutes ago to ignore the fact of whether these kinds of directives are actually lived, whether they are truly exercised, let's go back to that a second. You would obviously agree and see that all of the great directives of life, religiously, philosophically, and etc., are not the active standards of conduct for humanity. And, of course, that's part of humanity beating their chest and saying, yes, we must do better. Be that as it may, at the city level, how about this? All of these self-inflicted verbal wounds Thank you. Yes, we should treat our fellow man as ourselves, and by God, we don't do it. We got to knuckle down. What if all of that, like everything else, is all of that? All right, I'll be more specific. What if all of that is, from a revolutionary view, slightly askew? We don't have the time to do another rhyme. What if the idea that, to stay with that one, that we should love our fellow man as ourselves and we do not? What if the way it's taken, love our fellow man as ourselves? The middle of the bell curve, the middle of the bourgeoisie of life, the middle of humanity's bourgeoisie, and the middle of life's bourgeoisie, that they, if you stop and said, all right, do you know what that means? Well, everybody would say, well, sure, I know what that means. Just say, treat your neighbor as thyself, as you would like to be treated. How in the world could any reasonably intelligent person not understand what that means? What if no one understands exactly what that means? Because it does not mean exactly what it seems to mean. That it is still very loose, and that the only ideas, the only directives that have real pertinence are those that appear to be very tight, very direct, very specific, but are not. Could we foolishly take this additional silence? Again, it's not a sign that you didn't hear it, you just don't like it. Yeah. You understand? On that basis, it is not that people do not comprehend the directives of life, from one another, and it's not that they cannot do them. It's often another direction that the mind can't even deal with. Well, I'll try to make it cruder. Well, this will be a hard job. That is, love thy neighbor. How about that one? Now we got down to two that's non-specific to a religion. Love thy neighbor. Okay. And everyone that would qualify for being a reasonably intelligent neighbor, a person would go, we know what that means. All right. Nothing's amiss. Everything's just right. So we've got the large segment of humanity. In their own language, you say, love thy neighbor. And they'll go, yes, no doubt about it. What if it doesn't mean that? Don't ask me what. Whatever it is they think it means. About me having to analyze it. But the whole world, they hear it in their language, love thy neighbor, and they'll go, without a doubt. No doubt about it. And what if there's every doubt about it? That is, that everyone who understands it does not understand it. Would that not change the complexion? I thought that'd be crude enough. That could be correct. It's not that the ordinary mind could see it, but it could be correct. If that were true, then all the ideas that we do not understand one another, we misspeak, there's a difficulty in language, there's a difficulty in the individual, that even when we do understand such unambiguous things as love thy neighbor, we're all too weak to do it. What if it's not a matter of weakness? What if a matter that you, everybody, understands any particular directive such as love thy neighbor? Yes, no doubt about it. And then they wait. They wait for the second blow, like, do you do it? And of course you go, no. But what if you say, love thy neighbor, and the whole world, most of the whole world goes, yeah. That is, they understand it. You don't even have to ask them. They understand it. Then every other question, every other response that they might anticipate a question like, well, I understand it, but wait a minute. What if all of that is still part of the friction process? It's still part of the energy transfer. It's not that any individual or humanity is too weak to do it. There's no way to look at it. That everybody understands it, except for this. That what they understand is not it. And don't ask me what it is. It's just enough to start with that, all right, love thy neighbor. I understand that. Consider it. No, you don't. Nobody does. Because it is so direct, it is so certain, that it has got to be of importance. It's got to be. It would not be one of the oldest recorded sayings. It would not be that everyone on this planet in some way cherishes that, will nod to it. So it's got to be of supreme importance. But if it's of supreme importance, what I'm suggesting to you tonight is, if it is of supreme importance, it has got to be, regardless of whether you ordinarily see it, it has got to be uncertain, ambiguous, that is a sign, when it appears to have worldwide continuing significance, that it is looser than the tight, direct, unambiguous aura that it has with everyone. Back to something we were mentioning last time that maybe some of you could take a little further. We were mentioning the fact that part of the intellect's job in the secondary world was to, in a sense, render certain primary activities into what, and activities and desires into what would seem to be more acceptable, more palatable offerings. And the crude example that one of you came up with of it being poetically and ordinarily noted amongst people, that the very act, the physical act of making love can be a positive binding force between two reasonable people. Which is another way of saying it's fun to fuck. I ask you to consider looking at your own examples, because every secondary comment made is somewhere derived from primary activities. And it was not just sex. And it does not require that you look somewhere specifically or to try and set aside some area and think, well, I'll go look in the world of politics, the world of economics. In the secondary world, which cannot exist without talk, everything that is said of any consequence, everything that is said is in some way a commentary, a reflection, a derivative of a previously silent primary activity. Now, this kind of thing, the reality of this has been floating around too, if any of you want to take note, if you haven't done it already. All the ideas of the gods, mythologies, of gods working through man. And then when man began to call it other things, man began to realize that they talk to themselves. And then Plato's began to make up Socrateses and banquets. And Moseses began to make up bushes that wanted to make cellular calls. And then, of course, into Freud, into the world of psychology. That the human spirit, the human soul, the human psyche is cut up into pieces, and there are in fact pieces that seem to still be little demonic, uncivilized parts of us, and then there have to be parts that try and bring these two together and be more civilized. That there is an undeniable reality, if you can read history sideways inside your own DNA, that you can see the secondary world, the civilized world, the thoughtful world of man, as being a continuing process of making primary, crude, and I'm saying crude relatively speaking, of course, compared to the city, making these primary activities apparently be more palatable, which is not the way to say it, but there is no way to actually say it. So right now we're going by on the basis of language to make it sound more palatable, which is a form of being more acceptable and palatable, is to talk about that the actual physical act of love, regardless of what people like Jonathan Swift may have thought about it, that it can be a positive, almost a nigh religious, but binding force between peoples. Now that at least sounds, to most ears, more palatable than to say, hey, it's fun to fuck. It just, not just because of me using the F word, It's not just a shock or people go, well, certainly you don't say that in mixed company even today. That's still not it. Closer to it is what we were talking about last time, that if you try and take the language, which is playing oxymoronical games with what we're even talking about, but to try and take the language closer to simply depicting primary activities. The closer you get, assuming, hey, it's fun to screw, is closer to the primary than to say the actual physical act of making love between two people can be a positive binding force. Let's just say that the former, as much as possible in a relative manner, is closer to the primary activity itself. Just to say, hey, it's fun to screw. But the closer you get to that, is what we were talking about last time, the less it seems to take on its own life to make processes go into things specific and then to rebirth itself as processes again. In other words, it is almost a linguistic cul-de-sac. You just say it and people might go, well, yeah. But it's like, why did you say it? Or what are we going to do with this information? Just in social conversation, if you go around talking about stuff like that. If you're around civilized people and they begin to discuss, are we all dining together this evening? And most of the same crowd staying at the bar there, well, yeah. And someone says, well, who's for Chinese? Or is anybody, how about that new Italian? And you can begin to talk. It's part of the civilized secondary world. But if somebody just there in the middle, they've all had their second martini, and are we about ready to dine? And you're part of the crowd, or somebody is, and they said, I want to eat. Do you hear? It's like, where are you going with that? And you could attack that in childish, obvious ways and say, well, that's kind of uncivilized, or the man didn't really say much. Oh, hell, he said a lot. He said, let's eat. But then somebody else is going to say, well, assume his name was Buford. Buford, what'd you have in mind? Food. He is not going to be part of that crowd for long. It is simply he is not part of the secondary world, at least in the mainstream. Part of the job of the intellect is to make these activities, at least verbally, more than they are. At any rate, other than just sex, I was going to, again, suggest, maybe it'll only be a hobby for you for a few minutes, but to look around, to listen, and it's everywhere. You don't have to look anywhere specific. That anything of consequence being said can be seen in some way to be an expansion, to be a reflection, to be an appropriation of, to be a translation of some primary activity. But, well, you should see where I'm generally pointing. To say, I want to eat. We'll assume that would get you fed, as well as saying, well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't know, for the last week or so, I have had my little heart set on that new Algerian restaurant. Huh? Is everybody, you ever had? And you can talk about it. You can discuss it on the way over. And somebody can say, my brother-in-law went to an Algerian restaurant up in Cleveland, and he got sick as a dog. Really? Is the food real spicy? Well, I don't know. You can drive, you can talk. And so you'll get fed, let's assume, the same way that the guy, Buford, said, I want to eat. Assuming he'll get fed some way or the other. So everybody gets fed, but a dog can come up and whine, or punch his bowl and get fed. But what are you going to do after you feed him? You can say, good dog, and he wags his tail, and most humans assume that the dog's thanking you. Well, I suggest you could find it entertaining, which is the real form of information, remember, to listen for this. Advertising. I hate to get into that, since I've done enough verbal damage to some people's minds, to priests and rabbis and attorneys and accountants. At least I've had the decency never to get down to the real level of those in advertising. Don't write me. But anyway, I was thinking, other examples, not just sex. How about everyone's seen these kind of ads? It's not the fault of advertising, of course. It's the way life works. But if saying such things as, since we're seeing sort of a rebirth of larger engines here in the United States. Ads that say such things that it's comforting to know that you have enough horses under the hood to get you and your family out of a dangerous traffic situation, God forbid, should it occur. Which is another way of saying, hey, it's fun to go real fast. That's all it is. But they show things like this little small car, crammed full of a happy family with little nippers, and it's trying to get on the expressway, on a freeway, and you mash on the gas, and the thing goes boom, and you get right in line. Or you're pulling up to a four-way cross, and somebody runs out here and almost hits you, and you don't have time to stop, but if you got enough of the ponies under the hood, you put it to the floor, and you can get out of there. Oh, that sounds all right. In the same way, you can say that the very act of making love can be a positive blah, blah, blah. You can say that. And it's not that it's not true, and it's not that advertising sitting around trying to con people, but do you hear me? To go fast is closer to a primary reality, which I'd suggest to you is a form of fleeing, getting away from being ate by a tiger, or at other times, fleeing fast enough for you to catch it and let the tiger be ate by you. That it's fun to go fast. If you can go fast, if we were back in primary times, if you can go fast, you're going to live longer. Trust me. Because if we're talking about primary times, we're talking about before this was going on. That is, before humans could do what they're made to do, that is, outfox a tiger. And even out-tiger a fox if you want to be cute. That's your problem. But before you had the intellect, before there was a secondary world to where man could not outrun a tiger, out-wrestle a tiger, could outthink a tiger, since it's kind of known as a fixed match if it comes to a battle of wits between you and a tiger, using you generically. If it was back at primary times when there was not the secondary world, not the intellect operating at that level or at any level, then to run real fast, to go fast, was really neat. It could be the matter of life and death. And I suggest to you, I'm not playing psychological games, although you could make a psychological discussion out of this. I suggest to you that that is still fun, to get in an automobile and to go fast. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to play games about, well, I guess it's my suppressed machoism trying to come out. It's fun to go fast. That's it. It's fun to run fast. There is a primary basis to it. But notice, and don't fall into the trap of saying, well, since Ralph Nader and this and that, we just don't want to admit that people like to go fast. And it's just not socially acceptable anymore. Only the Germans drive their cars real fast, and notice it is still primary activities becoming more palatable, even verbally. If that's as far as you can see, start there. By these kinds of things, that it's good to have the latent horsepower there in your vehicle to get you and your dear loved ones, the little kids, that if something happened, a dangerous situation, it is good that you've got that reserve power. Now, God knows none of you people, none of you decent Americans would surely want to drive 160 miles an hour. We're not saying the car will go that fast, but even if it would, I know you wouldn't want to, but it's good that if a dangerous situation came up, that you could floorboard it and get out of there. I can cut that way down. I already have. It's fun to go fast. That's it. One more. Tie up this little paragraph. Even in psychological circles nowadays, there's nothing new, but you hear such things. And there are books, there are seminars out on aggression, looking out for number one. There could be this kind of phrase. I'm just going to make it up, but since I'm capable of making up, that means somebody's already done it out in the secondary world. But there would be such attitudes now expressed as, I'm quoting now, sick, that it can be a positive growth element for one to reasonably exert one's individuality, to even put forward one's own plans, in a civilized manner. Which means, all this is saying is, it's fun to have power. It's fun to dance forward and make everybody else dance backwards. It's fun to be on top. We all know what the missionary position is. I can tell all you people are recruited. That's all it's saying. It is the secondary reflection to talk about that within reasonable limits, not in perverse extremes, but it can be good for a person to exert oneself. For a wife to tell her husband, I don't like to cook every night. I was not put on this planet just to wash your socks and to cook for you, or for a man to say whatever he says to his boss or to his children or to his wife, to his family, to his mother, in some way to learn to exert yourself in a civilized, I know they always say that, in a reasonable, in a non-aggressive, in a non-hurtful, that there should be in this day and time with civilized people win-win situations. That everyone in a certain way perhaps cannot at any particular time have their way. We got to decide, are we going to eat Italian or Vietnamese tonight? So but if we decide, if the whole family, the whole crew says, let's eat Italian, and you were just dying for Vietnamese food, there's no reason that you should have to suffer over it, or there's no reason that they should gloat. That today, modern, sophisticated, psychologically well people can be in win-win situations. That you should go ahead and exert yourself. If the whole crowd says Italian, you should still say, well, now you know you're my friends, and I'm going along with you, but we keep doing the same thing every weekend. We all eat Italian. I enjoy being with you, but really, just once, let me tell you, I know some of you say you can't stand the thought of eating that food, but I'm going to tell you, I've eaten at that in your restaurant, and it's really good. Won't you trust me this once? Won't you come on? And they'll go, well, you got better taste than Buford, but what do you think? And I'll decide, well, I'd still rather do Italian. No offense. And civilized people, he'd have to say, well, no offense taken, but next time let's consider it. May they say, oh, yeah, we will. That all sounds as though it is a step forward in one's psychological health, personally or socially in large areas, which I'm not saying it's not. But all of that is saying one simple thing. It's saying it's fun to be on top. Lay down and shut up and enjoy it. Dance backwards. I'm dancing forward. It doesn't matter who it is. But that doesn't sound right. If it is said in jest, sarcastic jest, or it would be said as an example of an unhealthy relationship between people, like of a father telling his family, listen, I don't care if you people are tired of eating beans and weenies, I pay the bills, and that's all I'm buying. I pay the bills, you eat beans and weenies, plus I don't want anybody to say anything. Keep your mouth shut when I get home. Just eat what I give you. If you don't like it, go out and get your own. Now you can start that kind of trying to be oneself or exert oneself. You're doing it now at the psychological expense of someone else. So they don't use words, even this looking out for number one. I know there were a series of books, or a book that was a seller. I've seen on newsstands. Now I know there are courses that teach aggression, except it's done on the basis that it's aggression that is like a win-win situation. You're not going to hurt anyone. That it is not taken literal, even the descriptions, because that is not part of the secondary, acceptable secondary world. It's to say, hey, it's fun to push people around. Your kids, your wife. It's fun. I mean, you got to dance with somebody. It's fun to dance forwards. Make them fuckers dance backwards. It's fun to be on top. I know what the missionary position's about. I prefer being on top. I don't care what you think. That's the fun of it. Well, it's fun. It's desirable to know that you've got enough horsepower under the hood to get your family out of a situation. Yeah, it's fun to go fast. I don't know how much horsepower you need under the hood. Well, enough if the occasion arose. It's fun to go fast. It's fun to dance forward and make the rest of them dance backwards. I don't like the sound of that. Well, I knew you wouldn't. If you can really put into this inside of your own brain, inside of your own nervous system, and not just of what seems to be you talking to life or you dealing with other people, family and friends, etc., or whether it is you talking to you. If you can, then you should see that beyond this kind of humorous and super efficiency of the vagaries and inspecifics of the language, to see that there is a certain way that a real revolutionist has got to construct. Now, I'm not going to even attempt to hint how it might be done, but you've got to be able to construct like your whole new language so that you can talk to you, that you can make notes, that you can actually talk to you, as everybody thinks they're doing anyway, that you can talk to you, but if it's not in a new language, you have literally got to face this. If you personally cannot come up with a new way, with what amounts to a new kind of language to you, you are forever limited. You are stuck with the city proper, with the city news. I'm sorry, this city information. No matter what you do, no matter if you are still of that ilk to believe that there is secret books somewhere or secret groups, and then you go there and get this secret information. That's a great hobby. All that information is the same information. It is all propaganda, no matter what it is. No matter if it goes against the grain of what you thought you already knew. It is all city news. And it's all the same old stuff. Of course, it helps if the stuff you think you're searching for is literally in a foreign language. And your sweaty little hands, there you're in the damp cave outside of Damascus. No air conditioning. And you find the scrolls or a little book that this guy's dying, and he hands you the book. And you look, and sure enough, you open it up, and it's not in English. So then you know it's serious. None of you ever noticed that none of the great secret books are ever in English? Never. Never has been a secret book in English. Because if it was in English, he could hand you the book, and you open it up, and immediately sit down and read it, and then where would you be? Of course, I'll tell you where you'd be. You'd read it and think, what? Because it would say, it might take 200 or 300 pages, but it would say, love thy neighbor. What? But wait a minute. This thing is in Paleo Farsi. I don't even know whether anybody on this planet can read this. God, what a find, what a discovery. Then you can put it next to your chest, carry it forever. Information that is so foreign that it's impossible. There's no chance you could ever be governed by it. Yeah, but I got it here. And that old man, just before he died, when I was down on him, and I said, is this really the book? And he went, A man would not, with his final breath, in a sweaty cave outside Damascus, a man would not lay there and lie. So this is obviously the book. God, I love it. I got the book. And nobody can read it. Or even if you find somebody that says, well, I can put together some of it, but you mean you can't guarantee that you're actually reading what it says. No. Great, let me hear it. That is what we were talking about earlier. There is a kind of super efficiency. The directives, the ideas, as foreign as this sounds, as silly as it sounds to start with, the ones that actually would appear to be the most important in governing the life of man are actually those that are not that far removed from, all right, here's the information that men should live by. Jesus, I don't speak that language totally. Well, that's all right. We have priests or rabbis or psychologists. They'll translate it. Of course, I'm playing with reality. If we could make energy operate closer to a total 100% conversion, that is even more efficient, then you could ask a priest or a rabbi, your mother, your own brain, all right, now you're going to translate this for me, and you don't have anything to gain by misleading me. No, I'm going to do my best because I'm interested. Well, now, can you guarantee that what you're going to tell me, the translation, is going to be exact? No, I can't do that. No, I'm not going to tell you that because this is not my native language. I don't even know anybody that speaks this language anymore. But I can pick up bits and pieces. I've got a piece of a Rosetta Stone. Or maybe it's a It was one of those. It was a kidney stone I kept. No, never mind. I can't guarantee that I can do it all, but I can, by God, give you a good shot at it. That is the efficiency of it. Is the uncertainty. It's not seen as that. The uncertainty, if anything, is seen as, well, it's uncertain. I hear the directions, but it's uncertain as to whether I can do it. But nobody ever notices, wait a minute. The uncertainty is that I'm uncertain exactly what it says. What do you mean you're uncertain? It says, love thy neighbor. Don't play games with me. You've got to be an idiot not to understand that. Yeah, I guess you're right, Dad. Okay. But it's uncertain as to whether I can do it. And if the dad got carried away with a moment of sympathy, he could say, kid, I know what you mean. None of us can do it, really. All you can do is try. So there is a blanket uncertainty as to whether we can go by what we hear from the secret book, the translation. But nobody even gets to the point of saying, wait a minute. Is the translation, are the directions absolutely specific, on the money, and do they say exactly what they mean, and do I understand it? Nobody ever asks that. The closest they get, which is as far away as you can get, which is as close as you can get, is, wait a minute, do I understand that language? Nope, I don't even recognize it. You ask somebody, do you? Yeah, sort of. Well, can you translate it? I'll give it a shot. Well, before you do, is your translation going to be absolutely guaranteed on the money, right on it? Nope, can't do that. Good. Go ahead. I'm all ears. It is the power. It is the vigor. And I still say it is the charm of the arrangement. That what would appear to be, from the view that we were earlier discussing, if you hadn't forgotten it, it could appear to be obviously, without any doubt, a most inefficient arrangement for any group, all of humanity, to be governed by a foreign tongue. Whatever the gods are, whatever the cosmic forces, whatever it is talking to man, we're not speaking exactly the same language. Something is being lost in the translation. Okay. So, if we were your own DNA's grandparents, and you were more religious, you'd have to be faced with this. Well, wait a minute. That means the gods made us, or a God made us, and then in some way made us to where we cannot understand His language. That's what it amounts to. And you could say, well, wait a minute, besides how dumb that would be, which I'm not suggesting you be that rude to your superiors. But regardless of the obvious cheap shots, you could say, well, wait a minute, that shows what a dumb God He was to create us. And then He created, and He tried to talk to us and realized, Jesus, I gave them all kinds of abilities except to understand, Orthodox Farsi or whatever. Forget that. Let's look at it this way. If that be true, you've got to say, well, that is the absolute epitome of inefficiency. Except for this. It is super efficient. You have a machine that has enough tolerance of vitas machina, an alive machine in a symbolic sense, if not metaphorical, but a machine that has enough tolerance that the damn thing will operate. Whereas if the absolute, unequivocal directions such as love thy neighbor, if they were as full of certainty, if they were as specific as the secondary world would have it, that is, your ordinary intellect would have it, the things would freeze up. You would have a machine that had not enough tolerance to move. You would have a perfect worm gear to run everything. Perfect. And as soon as you put it together, freeze up. That'd be the end of it. So the very things that would appear to be a kind of exemplary inefficiency, that is, that even life does not tell humanity exactly what it wants, exactly what it means, that even those things that appear to be most tightly directed, most tightly wound, and most directly and unambiguously directed at this, and to the point that people go, yes, that nobody questions it. Yeah, I know what it means. I'm not sure I can do it. But there's no doubt I know what it means. To realize that that is its power. Is you don't know what it means for sure. Well, looks like we got to wrap it up again, so I was going to give you how about our final wrap for the week? WRAP, not RAP, because the last, my present act, the authorities here in Cleveland have threatened me, so I'm going to do the clean version of my wrap-up. You recall a few nights ago we were discussing, I mentioned in passing, Dr. Stillman's water diet, and how it operated and how it fit in a certain way in life. And I was suggesting why it was so popular. Not that Dr. Stillman's diet was anything singular. It was like he just operated in another area that the money was more direct and was taxable, but it's a form of religion. But I was going to ask as a wrap-up for the week, can any of you see how men's ordinary lives are not unlike the water diet? Like this. That their lives don't actually hurt them, and it doesn't actually help them much, but they're just inconvenient enough that you feel like you accomplished something just to stumble through it. A new name for city life, the water diet.